8,
You're watching The
7,
Experience, Comic Culture and Sales.
5,
Streaming live daily to
4,
Facebook, YouTube,
3,
Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and you're watching Devil's Advocates here on the EXP. So recently I've been thinking about the theme of saving things. And part of the reason I've been thinking about that is there's a lot of things that seem like they need saving these days. For example, in my own personal life right now, seems like everybody around me has either just been sick, is getting sick, or is about to be sick, myself included. So I'm hoping that somebody can come along and save me. My wife saved us all today. She made some homemade chicken soup. That was a real good saving grace right there. And also part of what I talk about a lot in the online comics book community is comic books and if they're in trouble or not. Where is the industry going? Where are we going to be in a year, 5 years, 10 years? Some of these trends that people see that they don't like in comic book collecting really kind of make you wonder about the future of comic books. So tonight on Devil's Advocates, I think we should ask the question, can we save comic books? Stay tuned after this. Hey, what's up, Kyle? How you doing?
I'm here.
Yeah, ditto.
I was not here last week.
That's true. We do have 100% more Kyle on the show. So, folks, we've done it. We've saved Devil's Advocates.
And ironically, I won't be here next week. So we're back.
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, you know, and on the back burner, we're working on some fun ideas for that show. So hopefully we can have something cooking for you guys that will make up for the lack of Kyle next week. But he will be back the week after. So it's kind of every other, right? So I mean, we got that going on.
Well, it's every other for the next week.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'll be back for a while, and then I'll be gone for a week, and then I'll be back for a while, and then
yeah.
I'm in a weird season. Let's put it that way. Because Frog Brawler asked, "Where is here? Here looks different." I am currently in what we would call corporate housing in West Baltimore. So that's where I am right now. But I'll be back next week. And then in a few weeks, I go to Dallas, Texas for the World Food Championships. So I may miss a week then as well.
But don't worry, we'll hold it down. I think pretty much most likely I'll be here throughout most of the episodes for the foreseeable future, at least. Until maybe the holiday season, and then we'll see. Might have something come up then.
I may have to do one or two of these shows from airports.
Well, and you know, I have been putting out some feelers with some people that are out there in the YouTube space, so I think we might be able to get some fun guests and stuff like that on here, or some creators or something like that. If you guys know anybody, or you yourself are watching, and you'd be interested in doing a topic, or know somebody that wants to come on, let us know. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're talking about saving things. And since we talked about this earlier, I've had three things in my brain.
Okay.
The song "Who Will Save Your Soul?"
Mm-hmm.
The song "Save Me." And
very appropriate.
The "Gee, don't fall asleep right before time to go on the air because you won't wake up in time to be on the show." Two of the three of those things are still songs, and the other one I was unable to do.
Well, you had a very busy day, so taking a little breather.
Yeah, thank God Jay's wife called me to talk to me about work right before the show. Otherwise, I would be on the couch right now snoring, and you'd be like, "Kyle's not here."
Well, you know, I mean, it's one of those things that maybe you'll have some fresh, dreamy advice for us on this topic. So I think this is a good comment to bring up, and we'll probably highlight this again later, but I just want to acknowledge Preston's comment here that he says, "I don't think comics are in trouble. Rather, it's the distribution network that seems to be having the problems." And that's something that we can talk about as part of this. But my point on this topic, which was my suggestion So I feel like the onus is a little bit on me, and I also didn't just wake up to deliver kind of the thesis here, which is there's Kyle. There's Kyle. Kyle is in Baltimore.
This is an inside joke.
Okay.
Rob is part of something called Cherry Capital Comic Con. And one of the other guys on Cherry Capital Comic Con is a guy named Pat. And for years and years and years, there was a hashtag "Where's Pat?" because he never would make it when all the other guys from Cherry Capital Comic Con would show up.
Gotcha.
So where's Pat? And the joke that I started making was Pat is scared to come down the beanstalk because he's a giant.
Fair enough. Very, very good guess there, Preston. So my thesis statement on the idea of, you have to kind of ask the question, right? Like, so save comics, like why do comics need saving? And I think that there is a mentality amongst the comic book industry, and when I say industry, I'm going to go ahead and include everybody who's in the hobby of comic books, from publisher to reader. There's a common mentality that comics are better than ever. Comics are fine. Comics are great. And there's also a common mentality of like, comics are, the sky is falling. It's all crashing down. And are we even going to be printing comic books next year? And so there's a spectrum, and there's a lot of people that seem to fall on each side of that spectrum. And for the people that don't think that this is something that needs saving, or, think everything's humming along just great, let me put it to you this way. It kind of depends on what you're talking about. There's certain areas of comic books that are doing better than ever. For example, Kickstarter comic books are thriving, or they're doing really well. There's a huge audience out there. That's something that's going awesome. But when you're talking about overall comic numbers and overall comic sales and kind of where we're at, and readership and people coming into the hobby, younger folks coming into the hobby, that's where I'm kind of coming from when I say like the question of like, does the comic book industry need saving, and can we save it? So that's kind of the framework I want to set up for this.
I think to talk about where I'm going to be coming from this, I think there's some understanding that we need to have in terms of what comic books is. And what I mean by that is we just came through a period in the comic book industry where the industry ballooned.
Yep.
It blew up. It bubbled. During the pandemic, when we were getting, when the most of Americans were getting essentially free money from the government, we saw the industry as a whole balloon up to something like 450% growth in a very short time. And now everybody's saying, oh, the industry's failing, comics are dying, comics are in trouble, because the industry has course corrected as a whole. If you look at Q1, let's even make it easier. If you look at Q3 2022, where Q3 2022 should have been, or was, is where comics would have been Q1 or Q2 2020, if not for that rapid influx of disposable income. So you talk about comics industry dying or shrinking or whatever, and it's not. What you saw was an anomalous new normal that is now truly showing its anomaly. And what we're seeing is the industry now going back to the growth trajectory it had coming through 2018, 2019, and into 2020. So there's this idea that, distribution has caused problems, that comics aren't selling. That the fact of the matter is that overall the industry is where it would have been if you took the whole pandemic and just removed it from history. Right? If that didn't happen, this is where the industry would have been trending. Now, the problem with saying that, and this is where this topic really gets kind of into the nitty-gritty, and I think we're gonna have fun with it, is you can't remove history. You can't take that out and throw it away like it never happened. You have to remember that this was a aberrant spike, And so how do we get, when you talk about can we save comics, how do we get from here on the chart, the growth chart, back up to here so that the aberrant spike is actually the norm? So
Yeah.
for me, it's how do we move from a 10% year over year growth across the industry to a 50, 60, 70% year over year growth, so that where we are now is where we actually were when we had a massive influx of disposable income.
Yeah, and I mean, just I want to add some context from my perspective on the situation on top of that, which I agree with what you said. But for me, it's, I think a lot of this talk comes from, I think in the middle of the spike, in the middle of the bubble, I started to see articles, videos, commentary start to crop up of, are we heading for a comic book crash? And my argument at the time, I made a video on it, I think right around 2021, kind of in the middle or near the end of 2021, of I didn't think we were going to head for a crash, but I did think we were going to head for a major correction to the norm, which is, as it turned out, what happened. I maybe thought things would be a little bit more healthy or a little bit more robust than they are now compared to then, but that didn't happen. But what I'm really talking about is you have to kind of go back to the 90s. The last time we had a boom in the comic book industry and the subsequent, relative downturn from interest that we saw during the 90s that has sort of kind of kept us in this interesting position we were in until interest from superhero movies kind of started propping up this second wave of speculators coming into the industry, or not always coming into the hobby either, by the way. Like, some of them were here all along. Their perspective changed, and they drove a lot of the interest in comic books that were going on. And we still see effects of that today. I think a lot of the variant covers, a lot of the first appearance pushing is related to that. And so I'm thinking a little bit more about the longer view. And if we're going to keep going on this course, what kind of things would have to happen for us to see that increase in growth year over year that we're looking for, that is more than just a keeping us on life support, so to speak.
So I also think it's important to remember the history here, right? You invoked the previous century, so we have to talk about what happened. Part of the death or the bursting of that bubble that happened in the late 80s, early 90s, and into the early 2000s was an evolution in comics that a great many retailers and comic book professionals were unprepared for and handled poorly.
Yeah.
I've said for years that comic books are an industry where many have thrived on eating their young and not having any new ideas. There's a mentality amongst comic book professionals that the way we've always done things is the best way to do things. And I have to remind people all the time that if you do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result, that's called insanity. And so in the 90s, you had the death of Capital Distribution, the emergence of Diamond as the exclusive distributor for for every basically publisher.
Yeah.
There were other people around who were distributing. Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House and stuff existed, and they would distribute Scholastic and other things. And there was, Emerald City Comics, which would distribute the super indies and the fanzines and some of this other stuff. And there was self-distribution always.
Right.
But by and large, it was Diamond.
Yeah.
And what happened was Diamond propped up a lot of bad ideas. Diamond propped up a lot of practices that, had there been competition earlier, would have seen a death knell to many, many, many of the stores that are now, and to the comic book professionals that are now the ones screaming that the sky is falling. The sky is only falling in comics if you are not adapting to the world you live in. Unfortunately, that's just the reality. There's a retailer near me who refuses to carry anyone smaller than Image Comics. I mean, straight up, because he knows he can make his rent selling just those 3.
Yeah.
But it's becoming increasingly hard for him to carry those 3 because he has to go through 2 different distributors. And in the 30 years he's been in business, that's never been the case.
Yeah.
Right. So now he's got to go through 2 different distributors. And so we talk about POS systems and things like Comic Hub and these other systems that would make that easier for him. And his response is, well, I know how to do what I do. And I know my methodologies. I've built them and they work for me. Okay, but you just complained that you can't carry SourcePoint or Scout or any of these other companies that will send books directly to you from their warehouse because it's hard to order them. But if you had a piece of software, it would be easier. There's this idea, Diamond Comics, for better or worse, saved a lot of stores that would have died and allowed a lot of bad things to continue to happen through their own business model. And it served them because that was their business model, right?
Right.
And so at the end of the day, it turns rather from a how do we get better here to a how do we keep going? And so it's what Rob says, comics are evolving. How have we historically engaged in comics from creation to distribution to marketing to consuming? It has been shifting for years.
Yeah.
The people who think comics are dying are the people who don't know how to evolve. And it's just the truth. The people who know how to evolve are saying, sure, things aren't as good as we'd like them to be. Sure, maybe our sales are a little down. Or sure, maybe we're having to adjust our expectations. But comics are what comics always have been. A industry that is led by the people who can see what's coming next and get there.
Yeah.
And so
The
I think,
visionaries.
yes, I think when we talk about can we save comics or how do we save comics, I think the first thing is to remember that if we're comparing what we're doing in comics today to what we did yesterday, we are essentially holding ourselves back. If we're not looking at how do we comics today through the lens of how are we going to comics tomorrow, we're doomed to fail.
Agreed. But I think that where the comparison from past to present does come into play is the comics are dying, comics are shrinking, comics are changing. There's different versions of it. There's a lot of people out there that are sort of either perpetuating myths or denying what's going on in some ways. And you can call it a decline, you can call it a change, but it is going through a shift. And one thing I want to go back to is a point here that's kind of related to what Frog Brawler brings up, which he asked, do you think UBI would make a comic boom? And before I answer that question, I just want to say that while I agree that the pandemic boom happened and that the catalyst was the stimulus checks, I don't think it's chiefly responsible for what happened with the comics boom. I think it started a chain of events, but also you had people that were hanging out at home and wanting more entertainment, and they were looking for other ways to maybe make money. So I think that played into it too. People were buying and selling comics. There was a lot of comic book shops online that opened up during that time, that tried to meet demands for people that, a lot of comic book shops physically were closed for a little while. And so there were some shops that wanted to open online or transition to online. So I think some things happened there that that kind of caused this speculation boom. And like when I talk about the 90s, that's exactly what happened in the 90s as well. In the early 90s with people wanting to buy, 50 copies of X-Force #1 or Spider-Man #1 or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, we can beat that over the head all we want, right? Speculation has always been a detriment to this industry people buying a comic not because they like the comic or want to read the comic, but because they think they can get money out of the comic in a week or in a day or in 2 days or whatever, has always been a detriment to this industry. The thing that has propped the industry up for years are the people who buy the comics because they want to read them and then hold on to them long enough that they actually become valuable. Right? That has been the thing that when the industry was at its lowest, those were the people buying books. Right? When the industry has been at its most bubbled, it's been speculators. It's been people who don't actually care about the health of the industry. They only care about lining their own pockets.
Yeah, and where I will both agree and disagree is you're accurate on the idea that the booms come because of speculators, and that the booming and busting, if you want to call it that, is not healthy for the industry.
Right.
But I would argue that in an ideal version of the comic book industry at the healthiest it could be right now, that would still be a market that is catered to, but perhaps in different ways.
Certainly.
Yeah.
If you are in any situation where you're not taking money from everyone who's willing to give you money, you're an idiot. I don't care what the end user is. You don't go to a bar and order buffalo wings and then say, I think the buffalo wings are going to make you a little nauseous later, and then they don't sell you buffalo wings, right? Because we have to get our food reference in.
Well, here's a side of celery. That's what you wanted to go with your buffalo wings, right? Just take that.
Right. It's that absolutely. Those people should and desperately need to be served. But again, it's this idea that speculation is driving any part of the curve of this industry is going to lead the industry to be unhealthy.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree with that completely.
So, and by the way, if in case you haven't noticed, if you're a speculator, I kind of hate you. Because you're the reason that I see so many of my friends going out of business.
Yeah.
It's they've gone out of their way to cater to the spec market. And then when the speculators dry up or the speculators stop coming in because they don't actually have any interest in continuing in the hobby because they're not making any money anymore, these stores' fixed cost models are off and they can't recover. So it's why I preach pre-ordering. I don't care if you want to speculate or not. Pre-order.
Yeah, 100%.
Because now I know what I'm going to spend, and you've paid for it already.
Yeah, but that's something that I talked about for years on my channel and just my presence in the comic space. Is if you are planning on speccing on modern comic books, not always. Sometimes there's a cover that isn't revealed or all that kind of stuff. I get that, but most of the time, read the solicitations and you will find what you're looking for, and you will be ahead of the curve, and you'll probably, get a cheaper bundle of comic books because of it. Because usually you can get some of it at a discount for doing FOC orders or whatever.
Right. Or you start a pull list and say, hey, look, I had a pull list for years where I told my LCS, I want every Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cover. I don't care what it costs. Right. I want it.
Yeah.
And I was able to get a discount by doing that because it let my retailer know, hey, if I order these, I know they're sold, so I can make a little bit less money on these. I could take a little bit less because I know I'm not going to take a hit.
So, but I do want to make sure that, that was obviously Kyle and I have a lot of common ground. We have a lot of differences on some of this topic, which is great. That's the perfect idea for this show, I think. But we took some back and forth there to kind of get to our views. But I did want to get to Frog Brawler's actual question, which is, do you think UBI, which is, for those that don't know, that's universal basic income. It's the idea of essentially having every citizen get a check that would either supplement or replace their income, to the idea being that it's sort of a utopian Star Trek Federation type society, staying completely out of the politics of that because it is a political minefield. I would just say that, yes, I think it would lead to another comic book boom because of the similar reasons I listed before for what I think caused the last pandemic boom. And I hope it doesn't happen just strictly for that reason, because I don't think it would be good for the industry.
I don't think it would cause a comic boom.
Okay.
I think it would kill us. because people would spend money they don't actually have. And what I mean by that is if you know you're getting a check every month for, let's just, to make the math around $200.
Okay.
People are initially going to spend that money on frivolity. They're initially going to go out and buy big sound systems for their cars and fancy shoes and comic books and video games and all kinds of stuff. The first thing I did when I got the stimulus check from COVID.
I'm going to guess you bought a big old barbecue.
No, I went and bought the most powerful computer I could buy.
Okay.
Do I need the most powerful computer I could buy? Turns out I do now. I didn't then. I spent it on frivolity. I should have spent $1,000 less and bought a very nice computer that would still be suiting me well and spent that other $1,000 paying off debt, doing other things. So what you do when you get this money that you don't have to earn, essentially, is you initially spend it on frivolity, and then reality catches up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, oh, well, gee, if I spend that money on my car note, I can pay my car off faster, so I don't have to pay that bill. So I'll have more money I'm saved out of my regular earned income. Right? Oh, gee, if I don't go buy that TV, I can save that money and use it to take my family on vacation. Or I can use that to pay a mortgage that I couldn't otherwise afford, or whatever. Eventually the reality sets in that the money from a UBI isn't actually new money. And countries that offer UBI, by the way, have inflation rates 4 and 5 times higher than the US generally. So you get extra money, but your money doesn't go nearly as far.
Yeah.
So you're not actually better off. You just think you are. And that doesn't help the economy, because the people who rely on you spending that money are the first people to realize you actually don't have any more money.
So it's interesting to me because I mean, we don't have to spend too long on this, but to me, it sounds like that by logic, you kind of would agree, though, that initially it would cause any kind of disposable spending.
It would cause an aberrant spike, not a boom.
Yeah. Okay. I get what you're saying. Okay. I do want to address maybe a few more comments from the chat, just because I don't want to get too far away from us and have to catch up at the end of the show when people have tuned out. If they'd ever like, hey, how come you guys aren't talking to me? Sean says, well, I understand it as a consumer. I question a store that only carries the big 3. And he follows that up with another thing that I think happens. Hampers things. How many shops don't have a website that allow you to purchase from them, even if you aren't local, and ship? They rely solely on the local market. That's an interesting, you know what, Sean, I think you have discovered something that I think Kyle and I have talked about a little bit, about the idea of shipping comic books. That might be a topic for a future show even.
Sure. But I think the thing Sean is forgetting here is economies of scale.
Yeah.
It costs more to be that guy.
Yep.
Right? If you want to have a website with an e-commerce solution and do shipping and all of that kind of stuff, it costs X dollars.
Absolutely.
If you want to be a small local comic shop, you carry just the things your customers want. You sell just to your customers, and you set your budgets and your costs and your everything based on that. So the thing that's interesting about comic books is that it's similar. It's more similar, say, to the restaurant industry than other things, is that the comic book industry is a mixed cost model. So you have certain things that are fixed costs, like rent and utilities and payroll and things like that don't really fluctuate. But your comic order on a week can fluctuate thousands and thousands of dollars based on the number of titles published in a week. On the 5th week of a month, generally publishers publish 10% of what they would publish other weeks. And then the next week, they're publishing 5 to 7% more than they normally would schedule.
Yeah.
Like, so you could go from your lowest invoice to your highest invoice back to back, and you don't have inventory to sell the previous week to make up for the cost of the following week. So, and just so you guys know, just so it's out there and on Main Street, most comic shops these days don't have net terms. They have to pay COD on their invoices. So if they don't have the cash on hand, they can't get new comics, or they have to play very dangerous games where they're borrowing money or robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it gets really, really bad, really fast. So this idea that you should have a website and you should ship, those are just additional costs. Now, if you feel like you can make those additional costs by doing that, then it's worth doing. But if you're like my local comic shop, where it's one guy and his helper, 2 people running the whole shop 7 days a week, 363 days a year, they can't do that. They just don't have the manpower, the time, or the income to do it. And if they carried the rest of the books and then they did that, they wouldn't make enough competing against Midtown Comics, DCBS, Heavy Ink, all of these other places where you can buy comics online, because they're just some small local comic shop in a strip mall. They would never rise above the noise to get noticed, to make enough money to justify it.
Now, the counterpoint I'll offer here, though, and we're talking about the concept of people needing to evolve if they want to be successful in the comic book market. I will say that now, Sean, your comment is specifically about a website. And I agree with Kyle on that front, that there's a lot of shops out there that, I mean, for that matter, there's a lot of small businesses out there, period, where the idea of creating a website is pretty daunting for them. However, in comic books, even if you hate one of the names I'm about to say, there are other options. There are things like eBay, Whatnot. There's other services like Whatnot, like one called Drip that I used to sell on. There's services like that. There's also Facebook Live sales, IG Live claim sales. And the beauty of that is you don't have to be doing that business 24/7 like you do with an e-commerce web store. So
economies of scale, you can limit your exposure.
Right.
And that's kind of what we do here, right? Like DF does their shows, Jen does her shows, Nancy does her shows, Henri does his shows, whatever. We have the shows here, and it's economies of scale. So you can limit your output.
Yeah.
We actually, and this is something that, you know what, I'm not even going to go there. I don't want to bring it up. I'm not going to do it. But the idea, well, because I can't. Anyway.
Yeah, I understand.
I walked down a street. I saw myself saying something I shouldn't say, and I'm turning around and walking back.
Fair enough.
But the idea is you can limit how much of that there is, right? To be scalable to your business. Now,
and you can do it on your schedule.
Again, this is a shop with 2 guys in their mid-60s.
Yep.
They're not going to be able to come on Facebook Live and do sales, or they barely have a social media, right?
But I bet you they can do eBay.
They didn't have a POS until last year. They had an old school cash register.
Well, you know what? As an outlier, though, but as a standard, there's a lot of comic book shops out there like the one you described, and a lot of them are doing eBay or other things like that.
And I'm not saying they're not, but what I'm saying is that they are, to me, the equivalent of that corner bar in your neighborhood that's been the same since 1980. Yeah. And there's no need to change because the same people show up. They buy the same amount of beer. They all have the fixed cost model is there, right? Ryan, not everyone loves it, but it's this idea of understanding what your business is and living to your business, building to your business. So,
and I just had to highlight Preston's comment here because he's agreeing with me. So I just really had to take that into consideration. I'm just kidding, but thanks, Preston. I appreciate it.
And Preston, we're talking about creating an aberrant spike, and you're not wrong, right? Like, fewer choices means you spend money on the choices you have, and there's nothing wrong with that. So where I'm at right now in West Baltimore, there are no gas stations. The closest gas station is like 1.5 miles away. If I need to buy gas or I need to buy a Monster energy drink, I have no choices. I have to go there and I have to pay what they ask. So again, you're creating an aberrant spike, but you're not actually creating a healthy growth model.
Yeah. I do want to talk about Sean's comment here because this is actually, to me, part of a potential avenue for a solution to the question. If you agree with the premise, it's something that, we talk about the comic book industry evolving, and this is something that I think it's contentious. We've talked about digital comics here on the show before. One thing that's happening right now is the launch of Distillery, and there are other services too, of course, but Distillery has a really interesting model. When I talk about appealing to speculators, they're trying to do that as a small part of what they're trying to do in total. They're trying to do digital comics. They're trying to do print comics as well. So I think digital comics is a very interesting avenue to explore. I do like to compare, and I've done it before on the show, so we won't spend too much time on it. The Eastern comic book market, Japanese comic book market, is very heavy on digital. That's one of the things Distillery looked at, and they wanted to try to emulate a little bit when they brought their platform to North America. So it'll be interesting to follow them and see how they perform. A lot of smart individuals involved there. I'm curious to see how that goes. But I think digital can be a huge boon to comic books when we talk about things like evolving. And I am not somebody who's ever going to, I have to say this, I'm never going to say I want digital to replace print. I want it to augment or provide a different avenue for people. It's also a lot easier to self-publish on digital, of course, which is great for getting stories out there. And then those could be printed physically if they're really successful in like a trade or prestige format or something later on. So I think that's a great point, and one that definitely would have been discussed at some point in the show if you didn't bring it up.
Yeah. I think as we look to the future of digital, I don't know that Distillery is the digital model we should be modeling ourselves after.
Not necessarily.
However, I've been talking to a lot of creators this week. For those of you who don't know, part of what I'm doing here is I'm running an exhibit on comic books as it relates to a specific author, Edgar Allan Poe. And we are doing webinars with for schools about creating characters and breaking story and world building and that kind of thing. And one of the things I've been doing is talking to these very independent creators who are teaching these seminars. And the thing that I keep hearing is tapas and webtoon and this new method of consumption of digital, because just digital copies of existing books have been around now. And I think we've kind of found our floor and found our ceiling on that. But it's this new methodology, this new consumption method of the scroll through method, where it's episodic, as opposed to issue based. It's not periodical. It's something else that I think is really the future of where digital is going. And I think the sooner that big comics figure out how to capitalize on that episodic rather than periodical, we'll start to see what people have feared for a long time, which is a new delivery method, a new normal for comics, where you have a Spider-Man story that's coming out episodically on a webtoon type platform, as well as your imprint traditional Spider-Man that is periodical or digital periodical.
And I mean, that's the funny thing about that. If that web form comic is amazing, that's all it takes. That's all it, I mean, people might hem and haw about reading digital, and there are some people that are diehards and they'll never ever do it no matter what. But for a lot of people, if you hear, 9 of your most trusted friends that you talk about comic books with, or see it online enough, you'll go check it out. And if it's good, you might go check out more. So I think it really depends on the quality, which is another component that I want to get to a little bit later in the show. Is quality of comic books can be very important as well in terms of saving things or creating new avenues. Rob, 100%. Yes, please support your LCSs by not abandoning your pull lists and doing things that are causing them to be stuck with books you aren't going to pick up, and then they have to foot the bill for and have trouble selling. Definitely agree with that.
So the next comment that Preston makes is something that I'm going to rebel against hard. As a consumer, an online store would have to reduce their comic prices enough that the added shipping and handling wouldn't put it over the cost of going to my local shop. You ever notice that you pay more for soda when you go to a convenience store than you do when you go to a grocery store? You're paying for the convenience of not having to do that.
Well,
Comics,
yeah.
So let's get into the numbers, shall we? A $5 comic these days with shipping that the retailer has to pay is costing close to $4. It used to be $2.50 and then like 10% additional for shipping. That is not the case anymore. You're looking at closer to $3 plus sometimes up to 40% for shipping. So you're much closer to $4 because Diamond has for years now been making profit on shipping and disguising it as existing costs. And this is something that you can look up. It's been talked about ad nauseum. But so if a comic shop is paying $4 for a comic they can charge $5 for, and they have to discount it to a point where you can justify paying the shipping, that comic shop is losing money on your purchase. Period. Plain and simple. If you pay $5 and then are willing to pay shipping in addition to, now that comic shop can make their dollar and stay afloat. But again, we're talking economies of scale here. It's why Midtown and DCBS and Third Eye Comics and some of these other companies that do a lot of shipping are able to do that because they're able to buy in such quantities that their discounts are significantly higher. Rather than living at a 40 to 60% discount, they're 65 to 70% discount. So that extra 10 to 15% is all the difference in the world.
So, but I just jump in here because when I read Preston's comment here, to take your soda analogy along for the ride here, what I would say is that Preston's saying that's why he doesn't go buy a case of soda at the convenience store. He goes to a supermarket or a place that's going to have a better price on it. I think he's just saying for him personally.
Sure, but it's a concept that a lot of people seem to think that if I'm buying it online, I want a discount. I got to pay shipping too. I should be able to get it. I shouldn't have to pay more for a product online than I have to pay in store. Well, if you want to go to the store and save money, go to the store and save money. Go to the store and pay, and don't buy it online. Like, that's your option. But if you're going to buy online, recognize that by discounting books, you're taking food off of a retailer's table.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also considerations too along those lines that, I mean, and again, I think this is a rife topic for another show when it comes to the idea of shipping comics and some things that go around that, not just the idea of shipping comics in general. One of them is, for example, I don't have an LCS. So my option to buy comics is online. So I'm glad there are stores out there that do that. And I would rather support certain businesses than others when it comes to buying online as well, meaning that I don't necessarily want to go purchase from one of the super large mega comic book stores. I would rather support a smaller business that maybe has more at stake for their employees, or maybe it's just one person, that kind of thing too.
Right.
So I mean, there are elements around that. There's also it maybe, and I'm totally making this up. Maybe Preston's LCS only carries the big three, and he wants, Boom and Source Point and all that kind of stuff.
Right. It's right. And that's just buy how you're going to buy. Like, I'm not saying that, but just, you have to remember that this is a business of people. And when you look at the numbers, things like discounts hurt people.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, comic shops are not Walmart.
Right.
They don't have that kind of buying power. There are some that have huge buying power, but they just don't have that kind of buying power to be able to cut discounts like that. When I had my store, if you had more than 20 books on your pull list, I'd give you a 15% discount. If I did that today, I'd be losing money on every book. Every single book in person. It's just the way the economy works now.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of that comes from, your mega online retailers in other sectors, like say Amazon, for example. People are like, oh, well, I can get it cheaper from them. And they try to translate that to the comic book industry, which it's just not, it's not a one-to-one. It's a very different situation. And also be careful what you wish for if that's what you want, because I think a lot of people have problems with the ethics of a company like Amazon, for example. And if you're trying to create a model similar to that in just the comic book space, it might have some of those negative connotations come along with it, because to get those prices low, there's things they have to do. And some of those things you may agree with, some of those things you may not agree with. You have to kind of shop at your own discretion. Yeah.
Until I can get a robot to staff my shop, I can't give you a discount. I don't have to pay a robot. I have to pay people.
And just imagine what kind of condition your comics are going to be in then. So for me, as we're kind of getting to the last quarter of the show here, so to speak, I do want to start talking a little bit about what I think are some solutions. And I will let Kyle or Jay highlight any more chat comments for a minute or two while I talk about this for a second that they want to discuss, because I think it's important.
I do want to talk about one thing because we were talking about digital. My main problem with digital comics is I don't have a single point to go through. I don't want to be in the same problem of paying for multiple streaming services to get it all. That is something I 100,000% agree with.
Yeah.
It used to be, and this was a thing that existed for a long time, and then it went away because Amazon, is that local comic shops could open up a Comixology store. So your local comic shop could sign up with Comixology, and the only books that were available to you through that Comixology store were the books that your local comic shop was ordering anyway, which was a little bit of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But you could buy digital copies of your book, and your local comic shop got a taste.
Yeah.
Right? I thought that was great. And they did away with that because Amazon didn't see it as being worth the effort.
Right.
So having a single point of contact is great, which is why I talk about Webtoon and Tapas. Webtoon is you download the Webtoon app, you pay your subscription if you pay for it. If not, you can read free stuff. And it's all right there, right? It's one point of contact. And so I think the sooner that the big companies that are offering the books that most of us are reading are willing to get on board that train, the sooner we can get to a standardized, localized, one-stop shop for a digital format.
Yeah, and I by the way, I completely agree with the problems that are being discussed there, because, like, for example, when I started reading digital comics, it was in the heyday of Comixology, and services like what Kyle was talking about were available. And then up until, somewhat recently, let's say I bought, a Epic collection for X-Men Volume 1 or whatever. Well, all of a sudden that would show up in my Marvel library because my accounts were attached. So when you're talking about things like the survivability of digital platforms and how they change, and being able to still access your content that you've paid for, which you're really just paying for access to that content, that's a huge problem. And then what happened with Comixology is they turned off that capability. So if I were to go in and buy that same collection now in the Comixology store, which would be a pain in the butt to find, I then wouldn't have access to it in my Marvel app. So now I have to read in two different apps. And, hey, maybe you like one app over the other.
You got to sometimes buy it twice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's a real problem, and it's a serious pain point. And it's the same thing that happens with, like, movies online. If you buy them and you buy them through one service and they're connected for a while and then they disconnect or they have it falling out, that's the problem with digital for sure. That's the main problem, I think. But again, go ahead.
I just wanted to point that out because that is a thing that is a very valid thing.
Yeah, I agree. So
how do we fix it?
My answer is, and it's gonna tick a lot of people off. My answer, it's money, and people don't like to talk about this, but the biggest at every level, it's money. But how do I mean that? Because that's a very it sounds like a corporate thing. Like I'm saying, hey, we need to give Marvel and DC and Image and all. We need to give them all the money. But if you really take a step back and think about it, if you have publishers, comic shops, retailers, let's just say retailers, artists, writers, all being paid and all making money, that's a sign that comic books are healthy and are operating at a high level. And furthermore, it means we have readers engaging with those things. It means we have at least buyers engaging with those things. And I'm hoping that it's readers, in my opinion, to see an appreciable growth. Like Kyle was talking about the top of the show, if we want to get to that, 30, 40, 50, 60% growth in comics and have that be something that keeps happening, it's going to be because we're bringing more people in, because that is going to be what leads to more money being brought in. And this is something I talk about a lot. It's something that's very important to me. When you don't have a lot of younger people starting to read comics or wanting to read comics, or they're preferring to go read manga, or they're preferring to do other things with their leisure time, that is going to be the ultimate thing that requires comic books to need to be saved, is a lack of readership. And look, Kyle and I are both of an age where I hope that we are reading comic books for a lot longer, but eventually that's not going to be the case. And that's not going to be the case for a lot of people that buy comic books or run comic book stores or publish comic books, or in some cases create comic books for much longer. And you might say, like, well, there's plenty of young creators in comic books. There are, but there's fewer and fewer super young talent, especially on the writing side, that come in and deliver really amazing stories.
I disagree with that, and I just want to stop you because I disagree with it so hard.
Okay, go ahead.
They exist. You just don't hear about them because they're not at Marvel, DC, or Image.
No, yeah, 100%.
There are amazing young creators who are working on Webtoon, who are self-publishing, who are kickstarting.
Yeah.
And so the idea that there aren't young creators is wrong, frankly wrong. The problem is that the young creators, it used to be if you were a young creator, you had to work one of three places because those were your only options.
Yeah.
Now there are 80 places you can work, and you can make a good living, and you can do great work, and you don't have to be Jim Lee in 1993.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you at all, Kyle. My point is more of when I talk about young creators getting in, where I go with that is what does success look like to that young creator, and what is their ultimate cap on their potential for, and like I said, money is kind of how I'm going to factor this in. What is their cap on earning? Because if you want to attract young writers and artists into comic books to keep this all going and to keep them staying interested and not bouncing out in 5 years to go write novels or go do other types of art, then you do need them to get paid. And when you have an industry that's been reluctant to pay their creators for, big screen adaptations or different adaptations of those characters into video games, etc., if they're not offering to pay them that kind of money, if they're not enticing them, the only real shot you have is to have an extremely successful independent comic book that gets adapted where you're, the sole owner. You own it, or you own it with a co-creator. And so I'm not saying that there aren't talented young people out there doing comic books. What I'm saying is, how do we keep that happening? How do we keep them getting interested in coming in when there's a lot of creative avenues out there that offer more pay that are going to become more enticing? Now, a lot of those folks, there's artists I talk to, and some people are surprised to know this. I know Kyle definitely knows this. There's a lot of talented people that that work in comic books that they have another job that provides most of their income. What kind of work could we be getting out of some of those people if we paid them enough? And by we, I mean the comic hobby altogether, paid them enough to the point where they could focus on their creations. And there's something to be said for the struggling artist and something to be said for how that can help create works. But I think that at the same time, we need that talent inflection to keep coming and not get burned. I mean, there's also a lot of those young people I talk to that they've had bad experiences, and they are not long for the comic book industry because of that, unless something changes or turns around for them personally. These are anecdotes, and there are definitely, like you said, plenty of young creators out there, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed as part of the problem.
So for me, the answer to this question is three things. If we're going to fix comic books, if we're going to save comic books, first we have to stop with the price being out of control, pricing just rapidly changing. Something we can all agree on is that Well, the reality is that the more comics cost, the less comics you can buy because you have a fixed amount of disposable
Exactly.
income.
100%.
So, you know, DC had a line that they draw the line at $2.99 when I first got into retailing. And by the time I got out of retailing, DC had no problem charging you $9.99 at all. They didn't care.
Yeah.
So that's an exponential growth, a $7 growth. That's exponential in 10 years. So that's something that has to happen is we have to recognize that the quality of the product has not gone up, so the cost should not go up. Second.
All right. Folks, I don't know if it's just me and maybe somebody slipped me something in my drink.
Nope. Okay, so there's a new thing. It's a new thing in Apple OS, the newest operating system on Apple computers, where you can set up reactions to certain gestures. And apparently I just did those gestures.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's like if I do this, like this is what I actually look like right now. But if I turn these things on, it makes me look a lot better.
See, I thought maybe we'd solved comic books and we'd saved them, and then that was the balloon. Yeah,
no, that was friggin' weird. Anyway, so the second thing we have to do is we have to stop with this the sky is falling mentality. We just have to stop. We can't say that comics need saving. We have to say comics are what they are. It's not comics that need saving. It's the people that need saving in comics. The people who aren't adapting, the people who aren't moving forward, the people who aren't changing with the times, the people who aren't willing to try new things. The hey, you kids, get off my lawn retailers. The hey, you kids, get off my lawn publishers. The hey, you kids, get off my lawn comic book fans that need saving. And the third thing we have to immediately stop doing is defining success for other people.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? One of the things that we talked about for a long time is why a store would only sell the big three, why a store wouldn't have a website, why a store wouldn't ship, why a store wouldn't offer a discount online. The deal is that their version of success doesn't need that stuff. We can't define what success is for them. Everyone has to define it for themselves. And the second we stop saying, you know what, such and such isn't as successful as it should be, or such and such isn't successful, or such and such is failing based on our own standards, and recognize that they're successful, they're doing well, they're growing based on their own standards, is a huge, huge difference. Because now instead of looking at problems, we can look at solutions. We can look at support. Right? I recognize that this local comic shop in my town only sells the big three because it's all they want to sell. And they're wildly successful based on their own standards. They live very comfortable lives. They have a very good store. They never are late on their bills. They never are late on their payments. You know, the one guy just went on a Caribbean cruise with money he made selling comic books. I never took a vacation when I had my store. Like we can't define success based on our beliefs. We have to let everyone else define success. So I don't actually think comic books need saving. I think we need to stop trying to determine how to save something and start trying to figure out how to build what's already existing, how to build what's already working. And so rather than trying to save something because we think it's not good, we need to determine, or we think it's not successful, or we think it's not doing well. We need to first determine, are the people who are making it thinking it's doing well? Are the people who are selling it thinking it's doing well? And if it is, then great. Let's support them in doing that. But if they're saying, hey, we need help, then we need to help them. But we can't from the outside look in and say, you know what, that needs help. Comics aren't some dilapidated building in your neighborhood that you can buy and fix up to help your neighborhood get better. You have to say, okay, that dilapidated building, do the people who own that think that's good? If they do, then leave them alone and support them in their decisions.
Yeah, I agree with part of that for sure. That we as a community need to be much more inclusive of just about everything. Who's reading, what they're reading, what they like, who's spending money buying, supporting who. In my opinion, for the most part, it's all good. There's maybe a few edge case exceptions, but it's all good for the comic book industry. So stop yucking other people's yums is a big part of my advice. I do have a bit of a different take on, I wouldn't necessarily, to me, it's not the sky is falling, but I do have a long-term concern for the health of the comic book hobby and where it will be down the road. Like I'm thinking about when my daughter's my age and she's 5 years old right now. So let's say 35 years, 36 years. I'm curious where the comic book industry is going to be. And I don't have it. Let's just put it this way. I don't think it's going to be gone, but I don't have a huge warm, fuzzy feeling about where I think it's going to be at. I am somebody by nature. I hope for the best and expect the worst. That's just my style. So to me, it is kind of one of those situations where I think that we do need to do more actively, and I think it's fair for us as fans. That's what I am as a fan, to look at the comic book industry and kind of wonder how it's doing, because I do think that there is some concern that's valid. And when you talk about something like the quality of the product, that is something, not just literally the physical paper and all that, but even in those cases, we've seen some downgrades recently. But even just what's inside those pages and what's being turned out turns off a lot of readers. And of course, there are cases where it brings in readers too. It's not all bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's kind of like the old song, I think we need to eliminate the negative and accentuate the positive. I think that's really true for comic books. And it's another trope that we mention a lot on this show is voting with your dollars. And I think that's a very good thing to do when it comes to this. I said, I think a lot of it comes down to money. Depending on which angle you take, a lot of the aspects of this come down to money. The more successful the comic book industry is, the more successful creators are, the more successful stores are, the more successful publishers are. All those things are going to lead to health and growth in comics.
Right.
So,
and like I said, I think there's this, and I think it's something that we do as fans because we're so passionate about the industry.
Yeah.
Is that we spend a lot of time trying to fix what ain't broken. And again, you talk to people like these self-publishers who aren't making the kind of money they used to. And they would say, yeah, I need help. We need to fix this model, right? It doesn't work for me anymore. And okay, let's help that person.
Yeah.
But if you talk to a lot of people, they would say, no, I'm sure I'm not selling as much, but I'm way more successful because every Kickstarter I do, I get 20% more backers. And that 20% means 20% more profit. And I was already profitable. It ain't broken. Why would we try and fix it? Retailers are saying, you know what? I don't deal in nearly as many titles as I used to. I don't carry a lot of the smaller publishers that I used to carry because I could get them from Diamond and it was easy. And I'd buy 2 copies of a Dynamite book and put them on the shelf. And if they sold, great. But if they didn't, they cost me $4. Right? Like I can't buy Starbucks for $4. And so I'm not carrying as much as I used to. But my profit margins are better.
Yeah.
My overhead is lower. My at the end of the day, I make more money. Just because it doesn't look as successful because they're not carrying as much, because they're not doing as much, doesn't mean they're actually not successful. Doesn't mean that they're in trouble. It just means that they've changed. So I think for me, I think the big takeaway here, and this is the thing that when we started talking about this really set in first, is that don't break it if it ain't already broke by trying to fix it. How many little kids break their toys because they're like, oh, if I just open it up, I can fix it. I can make it better. And then they break it. Right? That's what we're doing here. And while there are some things that are broken, we certainly should fix those. We shouldn't be looking for things that are broken or that aren't broken and trying to figure out how to fix them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can agree with that too. I just I see signs of trouble, and I do think that it's good to talk about it. I think it's healthy to talk about it, even if we don't always agree on the situation or the solutions. In that same vein, I actually encourage people that are interested in this topic. If you've been watching this hour, by the way, thank you. We really appreciate that. And you're in an LCS, maybe, if the owner doesn't seem busy, maybe consider striking up a conversation about this with them, if in a polite way, right? Not like, how's your business doing?
You want to save comics, get to know your retailer.
Yeah.
Get to know what they're going through, right? I had customers who, when they knew I was struggling, would buy stuff they wouldn't normally buy just to put a few extra bucks in my pocket.
Yeah.
I had customers who were once a weekers or once a monthers who, if they knew I was struggling, would come in and pick up stuff more frequently, even if it hurt them a little bit, just to make sure that I was good. Get to know your retailer. And then when they are having problems, they'll feel comfortable telling you, hey, this thing is broken and I need help fixing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think having those conversations, and I mean, by the way, that's something that I've talked about with creators. I don't have Kyle has a lot more FaceTime with creators than I do, but when I see him at cons or something, I'll always ask how the show's going, and it's very important, I think, to keep your ear to the ground on that stuff, and especially in maybe my position, because then I'm not really, but I'm kind of in a position where sometimes I can shine some light on some things, or maybe share a post that helps somebody learn about some stuff. And in that vein, there's one thing I want to talk about for those people that are still watching the show. There is if you want to go check me out on Instagram, my name is Bronze Age Nerd on Instagram. I'm super easy to find. There is a cause going on right now. It's a GoFundMe for a young woman named Jen, and she goes by Comics Will Break Your Heart. She got a lot of attention brought on her, which is great, by Comics with Bueller, a friend of the channel, Comics with Bueller. Travis definitely helped out with that a little bit. And what happened is she was diagnosed with a fairly rare and aggressive form of cancer at a pretty young age. I had the pleasure of meeting her at Rose City Comic-Con last weekend before last, I guess now. And she's an amazing person. The GoFundMe, she's currently has medical treatment going on, but it's extremely expensive. The campaign is called Keep Jen Reading. And on my page, if you want, there is a sketch that has been donated generously by a community member of Shazam. It's a really cool sketch. It's on an 8.5 by 11 piece of copy paper, so keep that in mind. But it's a really cool sketch. And if you donate and you leave a little green heart and tag 2 people on my Instagram right now, and then send me proof that you donated, you could win that sketch. I'll do a drawing next week for it. And more importantly, you could really help make a difference in somebody's life that's going through something really tough, that is out there trying to read comic books and help save the comic book industry. So maybe you can help save in one small way if you want to. I just encourage you to check that out. And you can go to my page there and see the art and everything. It's really cool. If you're a fan of Shazam, if you're a fan of art, and if you're a fan of helping out other people in the comic book industry that need it, maybe go check that out. Cool. So you got anything else about this topic?
Well, no, I just wanted to say that, guys, this is one of, when we talk about fixing comics, helping people in comics who need help, fixes comics.
Yep.
So helping Jen, whenever you see a creator, I see creators all the time running GoFundMes because they're work for hire guys and they're not getting work and they have bills. When you can afford to help someone, help them.
Yeah.
Period. That's the only way the industry survives. Like, we can talk about, should books be better? Should books be cheaper? Should we? No. At the end of the day, all that matters is helping people when you can help them. When they need it, stand up and do the work.
Yeah. Yep. Well said. I completely agree. So yeah, on that note, I figured with the theme of saving comic books, it was appropriate to bring that up, and I appreciate Kyle for letting me have the chance to do that. Go check it out. And then of course, if you are getting the heebie-jeebies about supporting my Instagram page or whatever, the link's in the chat. We just highlighted it. you could just go support her too. That's totally fine. That's the part that actually matters. So definitely go check that out and check out her campaign. But I can tell you that she's a really nice person and somebody I want to see reading comics in 20 years.
Go like the Instagram so you can win that art. Like,
you may
why would you not do that? What's the matter with you? Are you insane? Go win the art. I can't win the art, so you should go win the art, you stupid people.
There you go. And then, yeah, so we did drop the link in the chat earlier too. I had something I definitely want to make sure that we talk about. Besides that, just going back to our topics for next week and future shows, you can go suggest on the web form different places, different topics for us to discuss in future shows. Next week, you definitely will want to tune in because I don't know what's happening next week yet, but I can guarantee you it's going to be crazy because while the Kyle's away, the rest of us play.
And here's what's funny is there's a chance I'll be home and I'll be here and be like, what are we talking about? And there's a chance that you'll be running the show yourself because if Jay's plane gets delayed, we're going to be in real trouble.
Okay. No, that's all good. Luckily, I've got some experience running the switches myself, so we can make it all happen. And we always do what we can to support each other over here. So that's awesome. Awesome. Well, that's all I got up for the topic, and I didn't see any other urgent chats coming through that we need to address. So I think we'll call it a show for this one. Thanks a lot for being here. I do ask if you're into supporting things in the comic book industry, you could go ahead and, like this video by hitting the thumbs up. You could subscribe here at the EXP. You could hit the notification bell so you get notified when we go live. There are a lot of really cool shows on this channel that I recommend checking out, especially like you were talking about original art sales on this channel, comic book claim sales, talking about the news with Dan Wickline, all kinds of fun stuff. So definitely make sure you're checking out all that here on the EXP, and we appreciate you watching.
And if you're in the DMV, so that's, basically between Richmond and Baltimore, come to Baltimore for PoeFest and the Poe and Comics exhibit that I've worked my ass off on, and that I'm making Jay fly all the way to Baltimore from Texas to help me work. So, maybe do that.
Sounds good.
Hi, Bronze's wife in the background.
Hello.
I saw that.
Yep, that was a cameo, everybody. You got a rare sneak peek.
Like Sasquatch.
It's like Sasquatch, yep. Only way prettier.
Fucking hope so.
All right, we're officially off the rails now, so we're going to call an evening. Have a great one, everybody. We'll catch you next week, and have a great show, Kyle.
See you later.
Later.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.